The wind carried dust devils across the main street of Sweetwater, Texas, when Lydia Everhart stepped down from the stagecoach, and every eye in town watched her like vultures circling wounded prey. She was small, barely reaching 5 feet in her buttoned boots, with porcelain skin that had never seen a hard day's work and hands so delicate they trembled as she clutched her carpetbag. The September heat of 1872 beat down mercilessly, and within moments, her pale cheeks flushed crimson. The stage driver, a grizzled man named Polk, shook his head as he unloaded her trunk. "Miss, you sure you got the right stop?" he asked, his tone pitying. "Sweetwater ain't no place for someone like you." Lydia lifted her chin, though the gesture seemed to take all her courage. "I am expected at the schoolhouse. This is where I am meant to be." A woman in a faded calico dress approached, her face weathered by the Texas sun. "You're the new teacher. Lord have mercy. I'm Martha Billings, wife of the blacksmith. We wrote to Fort Worth requesting someone qualified, but they must have misunderstood our needs entirely." The word stung, but Lydia was accustomed to such assessments. All her life, people had treated her like spun glass, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. Born with a weak constitution, she had spent her childhood confined to sick rooms while doctors shook their heads and predicted an early grave. But she had survived, and more than that, she had learned to read the world through books when she could not experience it firsthand. She had studied hard, earned her teaching certificate, and applied for positions far from the suffocating sympathy of her Boston relatives. "I assure you, Mrs. Billings, I am quite capable," Lydia said, though her voice wavered in the oppressive heat. Martha's expression softened with pity. "Come along then. Let me show you to the boarding house. You look about ready to faint, and we cannot have that on your first day." The boarding house was a modest structure with peeling paint and creaking floorboards. The room Lydia was shown to contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the dusty street. As Martha left her to settle in, Lydia heard the whispers through the thin walls. "She will not last a week. Did you see her? A strong breeze could blow her clean away. Those children will eat her alive. She has no business being here." Lydia sat on the bed, fighting the familiar burn of tears. She had crossed half a continent to prove she was more than her limitations, only to find the same judgments waiting for her in this frontier town. But she had not come this far to surrender. Tomorrow she would show them. Somehow. The next morning brought no relief from the heat. Lydia dressed in her plainest dress, a gray cotton that already felt too heavy for the climate, and made her way to the schoolhouse. It was a simple building on the edge of town. One room with rough-hewn benches and a blackboard that had seen better days. 15 children of varying ages stared at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism. The oldest, a lanky boy of perhaps 14, crossed his arms and leaned back on his bench. "You are going to teach us," he drawled. "My little sister could knock you over." Several children giggled. Lydia felt her hands shake but clasped them together to still the tremor. "My name is Miss Everhart," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I understand I may not look like what you expected, but I know literature, mathematics, history, and geography. I know how to help you learn. That is what matters." The day was grueling. The older children tested her constantly, while the younger ones seemed confused by her gentle manner. By the time she dismissed them at 3 o'clock, her head pounded and her legs felt weak. She had barely eaten, her stomach too nervous to accept food, and the heat had left her dizzy. As she locked the schoolhouse door, a group of women approached. Among them was Martha Billings and 2 others Lydia had not yet met. "Miss Everhart," Martha began, her tone apologetic but firm. "We need to speak plainly. Several of us have concerns about your ability to manage the children." Today alone, young Tommy Morrison said you let the boys run roughshod over you." "I did not let anyone," Lydia started, but another woman cut her off. "You look half dead already, and it has been one day. How do you expect to last the winter? What happens when you need to stoke the fire in the schoolhouse when it is below freezing? What happens when a child is injured and needs someone strong to carry them for help?" Lydia wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the truth was she felt half dead. Her vision swam slightly, and she had to lock her knees to stay upright. "I will manage," she whispered. The women exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. They did not believe her. As they dispersed, Lydia heard their murmurs. "Poor thing. She will be on the next stage east, mark my words." That evening, Lydia sat in her room with a lamp burning low, writing a letter to her aunt in Boston. She wanted to tell the truth, to admit how hard everything was, how the heat sapped her strength and the people's doubt cut deeper than any knife. But pride stopped her hand. Instead, she wrote cheerful lies about a warm welcome and eager students. The knock on her door startled her. When she opened it, the boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had settled in Sweetwater years ago, stood with a tray. "You did not come down for supper," Mrs. Chen said, her English precise and unaccented. "You must eat." Lydia accepted the tray gratefully. As Mrs. Chen turned to leave, Lydia found her voice. "You think I am making a mistake being here?" Mrs. Chen paused, her dark eyes assessing. "People in this town judge quickly. They judged me when I arrived, said I did not belong, but I am still here. You want to know what I think? I think strength comes in forms they are too foolish to recognize. Eat, rest, prove them wrong." The words gave Lydia a spark of hope, fragile but present. The next week brought no improvement in the town's opinion. If anything, the doubt grew stronger. Parents began keeping their children home, saying the teacher was too sickly to provide proper instruction. The school board, consisting of 3 prominent men, called Lydia in for a meeting. "Miss Everhart," said Mr. Patterson, the general store owner, "we appreciate your dedication, but we must consider the welfare of our children. Perhaps you would be better suited to a position in a city, somewhere with less demanding conditions." It was dismissal dressed in kindness, and Lydia felt her dream slipping away. "Please," she said, hating how her voice cracked. "Give me more time. I can adapt. I can be stronger." The men looked uncomfortable, as though she had asked them to witness something unseemly. "We will discuss it," Mr. Patterson said finally, "but you should prepare yourself for the likelihood that this position may not work out." Lydia left the meeting with tears streaming down her face, caring not who saw. She walked out of town, needing to escape the prying eyes and pitying looks. The landscape beyond Sweetwater was harsh and beautiful, all scrub brush and red earth beneath an endless sky. She walked until her legs ached, until the town was a small smudge behind her. That was when she saw him. He emerged from a stand of mesquite trees like something from a legend, leading a pack mule loaded with furs and supplies. He was enormous, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they blocked the sun. His hair was dark brown, longer than fashion dictated, brushing his collar in waves that looked like they had been tamed by wind rather than comb. His arms, bare beneath a rolled-up flannel shirt, were corded with muscle that spoke of a life spent in hard physical labor. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his eyes, when they landed on Lydia, were the color of mountain stone, gray-green and sharp. He stopped, taking in the sight of her, this small crying woman in the middle of nowhere. "You lost." His voice was deep, rough from disuse. Lydia wiped at her tears quickly. "No, I just needed air." He studied her for a long moment, those keen eyes missing nothing. "You are the new teacher. Heard about you in town." "I am sure you heard all sorts of things," Lydia said bitterly. "How I am too weak, too fragile, too useless for frontier life. Something shifted in his expression. He moved closer, and Lydia had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, she could see a scar cutting through his left eyebrow and the weathered tan of someone who lived under open sky. "Name is Yates Kincaid," he said. "I trap in the hills north of here, come down for supplies every few weeks. And I will tell you something, Miss Teacher. The people in that town, they judge what they see on the surface. They thought I was a savage when I first showed up, said I was more animal than man. But I have survived things that would kill most of them. Strength is not always about size." His words, so similar to what Mrs. Chen had said, struck something deep in Lydia. "You are kind to say so, but they are not wrong. I'm not strong. I have been ill most of my life. I struggle with things others find simple." Yates shook his head slowly. "You came here alone, did you not? Left everything familiar to try something new. That takes a kind of strength they do not have. They are scared of anything different, anything that challenges their narrow ideas." He reached into his pack and pulled out a canteen, offering it to her. "Drink. You are flushed from the heat." Lydia accepted, the water cool and sweet. As she drank, she noticed his hands, massive and scarred, capable of crushing bone but holding the canteen with surprising gentleness. "Why are you out here alone?" she asked, returning the canteen. "Could ask you the same. I needed to think, to decide if I should give up and go home." Yates was quiet for a moment, then he gestured to a flat rock in the shade. "Sit before you fall over." It was a command, not a request, but Lydia found herself obeying. Her legs were indeed shaky. Yates settled nearby, close enough to talk but far enough to be proper. The mule, accustomed to waiting, began nosing at the sparse grass. "You want my opinion," Yates said. "Those folks in town are comfortable. They do not like being uncomfortable, and you make them uncomfortable because you do not fit their idea of how things should be. But that does not mean you are wrong for being here. Means they are wrong for being so rigid. But if I cannot do the job, can you raid? Of course. Can you write, do mathematics, teach children those things? Yes. Then you can do the job. The rest is just them being afraid." Lydia looked at this mountain of a man, this stranger who saw her more clearly in minutes than the townspeople had in days. "Thank you," she said softly. "I needed to hear that." Yates stood, extending a hand to help her up. When she placed her small hand in his, it disappeared entirely in his calloused palm. He pulled her to her feet with such ease she might have weighed nothing. "Come on. I will walk you back before someone decides you have been carried off by wolves." The walk back to town was quiet but companionable. Yates matched his long stride to her shorter steps without complaint. When they reached the edge of Sweetwater, he paused. "I will be around for a few days, getting supplies and such. If those folks give you trouble, you tell them Yates Kincaid said you have more spine than the lot of them combined." Despite everything, Lydia smiled. "I do not think that would help my case. Maybe not, but it is the truth." He tipped his head to her and continued toward the general store, his mule plodding behind him. Lydia watched him go, feeling something shift inside her. For the first time since arriving in Sweetwater, she did not feel completely alone. Over the next few days, Lydia threw herself into teaching with renewed determination. She arrived at the schoolhouse early to prepare lessons and stayed late to clean. When the older boys acted up, she did not back down, using her knowledge as a weapon they could not fight. She taught them about ancient Rome and the mathematics of surveying land, things that might actually prove useful in their lives. Slowly, grudgingly, some of the children began to listen. She saw Yates twice more during his time in town. Once at the general store, where she was buying chalk and he was purchasing coffee and ammunition. He nodded to her, a small acknowledgement that somehow meant more than flowery words. The second time was at the boarding house, where he had come to deliver fresh meat to Mrs. Chen. "Miss Everhart," he said, his voice carrying across the dining room. "You still here? Good." The other boarders stared, shocked that the fearsome mountain man knew the fragile teacher. That evening, as Lydia prepared lessons by lamplight, Mrs. Chen brought her tea and sat down uninvited. "Yates Kincaid spoke to you," she said, a statement rather than a question. "He was kind when I needed kindness. He is a good man. Rough but good. He lost his family years ago, disease took them. He went to the mountains to grieve and never fully came back, but he has a good heart." Lydia felt a pang of sympathy for the big man. "That is terribly sad." "Yes, but he survived, like you will survive." Mrs. Chen patted her hand and left Lydia to her thoughts. The following week, Yates left town, heading back to his mountain territory. Lydia felt his absence more than she expected. But his words stayed with her, giving her strength when parents complained and when her own body betrayed her with exhaustion. October brought cooler temperatures, a relief after the brutal heat. The children were finally settling into a routine, and several parents had grudgingly admitted that their sons and daughters were learning. But the school board remained unconvinced. "We will evaluate at the end of November," Mr. Patterson told her. "If the children have not shown significant improvement, we will need to make a change." It was a stay of execution, nothing more, but Lydia accepted it. The week before Thanksgiving, a child went missing. 8-year-old Samuel Brooks wandered away from his family's homestead and disappeared into the scrubland. The whole town turned out to search, spreading across the harsh landscape in groups. Lydia joined the search, despite protests that she was too delicate for such activity. She was assigned to a group with Martha Billings and 2 other women. But when they decided the terrain was too rough and turned back, Lydia continued alone. She called Samuel's name until her throat was raw, pushing through mesquite and cactus that tore at her skirt. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, she heard a faint cry. Samuel was wedged in a narrow ravine, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. When he saw Lydia, he began to cry harder. "I am here," Lydia said, scrambling down to him with no thought for her own safety. "You are going to be all right." But as she reached him, she realized the problem. Samuel was too heavy for her to carry, and his leg was clearly broken. She could not leave him alone in the growing darkness, but she also could not get him out alone. She removed her shawl and wrapped it around him for warmth, then held him close, singing softly to calm his tears. Night fell, bringing cold that seeped into their bones. Lydia kept Samuel awake, telling him stories, asking him questions, anything to keep his mind alert. Hours passed. Lydia's body ached and she shivered uncontrollably, but she held the boy close, using her own body heat to keep him warm. Then she heard hoofbeats and voices. A search party, still looking despite the darkness. "Here!" Lydia screamed, her voice barely more than a croak. "We are here!" Torchlight appeared above them. Multiple faces looked down, and then one man swung down into the ravine with the confidence of someone accustomed to rough terrain. "Yates Kincaid." "You found him," he said, crouching beside them. His hands were gentle as he examined Samuel's leg. "Broken, but he will heal. You did good, Miss Everhart." "I could not get him out," Lydia said, her teeth chattering. "I am sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for. You stayed with him. You kept him alive. That is what matters." Yates removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around Lydia, then carefully lifted Samuel. The boy cried out at the movement, but Yates murmured something soothing and adjusted his hold. With Samuel secured in one arm, he offered his free hand to Lydia. "Can you climb if I help you?" Lydia nodded, though in truth she was not sure. But with Yates hauling her up one-handed, his strength making it seem effortless, She found herself back on solid ground. The ride back to town was a blur. Yates had brought an extra horse and he placed Lydia on it, leading it himself while carrying Samuel. Other members of the search party surrounded them, talking excitedly about the rescue. When they reached Sweetwater, Samuel's parents rushed forward, sobbing with relief. The doctor took the boy to set his leg and someone wrapped a blanket around Lydia's shoulders. "Miss Everhart," Samuel's father said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my boy's life. How can we ever thank you?" Lydia, exhausted beyond measure, could barely form words. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Yates said, his deep voice cutting through the chatter. "Most folks turned back when the terrain got tough. She kept going. She found him and stayed with him through the night. Give credit where it is due." The crowd fell silent, absorbing his words. Martha Billings stepped forward, her expression transformed. "Miss Everhart, I owe you an apology. I judged you harshly and I was wrong. What you did tonight took courage and dedication. I am sorry for ever doubting you." Others murmured agreement, but Lydia barely heard them. Her vision was darkening at the edges and her legs were giving out. She felt herself falling and then strong arms catching her, lifting her as easily as if she were a child. "She needs rest and warmth," Yates said. "Where is she staying?" Someone directed him to the boarding house. Lydia drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the steady rhythm of Yates's stride and the solid warmth of his chest. She felt safer than she had in months. Mrs. Chen fussed over her, getting her into warm nightclothes and under thick blankets. The doctor came to check on her, declaring her exhausted but unharmed. "She needs rest," he said. "Several days at least." When Lydia woke, it was late morning. Sunshine streamed through her window and a tray sat on her bedside table with food and a note in strong, blocky handwriting. "You did good. Rest now." Lydia smiled and tucked the note under her pillow. The rescue changed everything. When Lydia returned to the schoolhouse after 3 days of enforced rest, she found it cleaned and organized. The parents had taken turns preparing it for her return, and they had stocked the wood supply for the winter months ahead. "We were wrong about you," Mr. Patterson said, visiting her on her first day back. "The school board voted unanimously. Your position is secure for as long as you want it." The children greeted her with cheers, even the older boys who had given her such trouble. Samuel, his leg in a splint, sat in the front row and beamed at her. But as the days passed, Lydia found her thoughts drifting not to her success but to Yates. She had not seen him since the night of the rescue. Mrs. Chen mentioned he had returned to the mountains the next day, leaving without fanfare. November gave way to December. The first cold snap brought frost to the windows and a chill that penetrated the thin walls of the schoolhouse. Lydia proved she could stoke the fire and manage the cold, though it drained her more than she cared to admit. She thought often of Yates, wondering how he fared in the mountains during winter. Mrs. Chen assured her he was more than capable of surviving, but Lydia worried nonetheless. Christmas approached, and the town prepared for a modest celebration. Lydia helped the children prepare a small performance for their parents, songs and recitations they had practiced for weeks. The night of the performance, the schoolhouse was packed with families. Lydia stood to the side, watching her students shine, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. As the final song ended and applause filled the room, the door opened, bringing a gust of cold air. Yates Kincaid stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders and beard. His eyes found Lydia immediately, and something passed between them, wordless and powerful. After the families departed, offering Lydia praise and Christmas wishes, Yates remained. He helped her bank the fire and straighten the benches, his presence filling the small space. "You came back," Lydia said, unable to hide her pleasure. Planned to spend the winter in the mountains, but it seemed too quiet up there. He paused, looking uncomfortable. Thought maybe I would stay in town for a spell, if that is acceptable. More than acceptable, Lydia said softly. Yates cleared his throat. The performance was good. Those children respect you now, I could see it. Thanks to you. If you had not believed in me when no one else did, I might have given up. No, you would not have. You have too much steel in you for that. He moved closer, and Lydia's heart began to race. Miss Everhart, Lydia, I am not good with words, but I have been thinking about you since I left. Cannot seem to stop. I know I am just a rough mountain man and you are educated and refined, but stop, Lydia interrupted, stepping closer to him. You are the strongest, kindest man I have ever met. You saw me when others looked right through me. You are not just anything. Yates's scarred hands, so large and powerful, reached out to cup her face with infinite gentleness. I am going to kiss you now, if that is all right. Please, Lydia whispered. His lips were warm and soft despite the cold outside, the kiss tender and careful as though he feared breaking her. But Lydia pressed closer, her hands gripping his shirt, showing him she was not fragile, not in the ways that mattered. When they parted, both were breathing hard. Yates rested his forehead against hers. I want to court you proper, he said, if you will have me. Yes, Lydia said, joy flooding through her. Yes, I will have you. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Yates took a room at the boarding house and found work helping the blacksmith and doing odd jobs around town. Every evening he called on Lydia, and they walked together, talked for hours, discovering each other. Lydia learned that Yates had been raised in the mountains of Colorado, that he had married young and lost his wife and infant daughter to cholera in 1868. The grief had driven him into isolation, but slowly he had begun to heal. Meeting Lydia, he said, had completed that healing. You make me believe in new beginnings, he told her one night as they sat in Mrs. Chen's parlor, carefully chaperoned but comfortable. You gave me the courage to create my own beginning, Lydia replied. In February, Yates asked her to marry him. There was no elaborate proposal, just the two of them on a cold, clear night, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. I love you, he said simply. I want to build a life with you if you want the same. I do, Lydia said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I love you so much. They married in March of 1873, a simple ceremony at the church with the whole town in attendance. Lydia wore a dress of blue silk, and Yates wore his best clothes, his long hair neatly trimmed but still touching his collar. When he lifted her veil and kissed her, the congregation applauded. The question of where to live was resolved when Yates built them a cabin on land just north of town, close enough for Lydia to reach the schoolhouse, but far enough for privacy. He constructed it himself, his powerful arms and back turning logs into walls, creating a home designed for their needs. The cabin had large windows for light, a massive fireplace that could heat the entire space, and a bedroom with a bed he built by hand, sturdy and strong. There was a room that could serve as Lydia's study, where she prepared lessons and read, and a kitchen large enough for her to move comfortably. Lydia continued teaching, and the school flourished under her care. The children adored her, and their parents respected her. On cold days when her health flagged, Yates would drive her to school in their wagon, making sure she was settled before heading to his own work. He had given up trapping, instead working land he purchased, raising cattle and horses. The physical labor suited him, and he thrived. In the evenings, he would return home, massive and dusty, and Lydia would meet him with water to wash and a meal on the table. Their life together was simple but rich. Yates treated Lydia like precious porcelain in some ways, always careful of her health, always protective. But he also treated her like an equal, asking her opinion, respecting her intelligence, supporting her dreams. In November of 1873, Lydia realized she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Her health had always been delicate, and pregnancy carried risks for any woman, more so for her. When she told Yates, he went pale beneath his tan. "Are you all right?" "What did the doctor say? Do you need to stop teaching? Tell me what you need." Lydia took his hands, so large they engulfed hers completely. "The doctor says I am healthy, that I should be cautious but not fearful. I want this baby, Yates, our baby." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I cannot lose you, I cannot. You will not. I am stronger than I look, you taught me that." The pregnancy was challenging. Lydia tired easily and had to reduce her teaching hours. The school board, now firmly supportive, hired an assistant to help her. But she refused to give up entirely, teaching morning classes until she was 7 months along. Yates hovered constantly, driving her to school, carrying her over rough ground, watching her like a hawk. His protectiveness sometimes bordered on excessive, but Lydia understood it came from love and loss. She let him care for her, knowing it soothed his fears. In June of 1874, after a long, difficult labor, Lydia gave birth to a son. They named him Matthew Everhart Kincaid, and he was perfect, with his father's strong build and his mother's delicate features. Yates held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming into his beard. "I thought I would never have this again," he whispered. Thank you for giving me this." Lydia, exhausted but radiant, smiled. "We made him together. He is ours." Recovery was slow, but Lydia had help. Mrs. Chen visited daily, bringing food and helping with the baby. Martha Billings organized the women of the town to assist, their earlier judgment transformed into fierce loyalty. By September, Lydia had regained her strength and returned to teaching part-time. Yates built a small addition to the cabin, a nursery where Matthew could sleep safely while Lydia prepared lessons in the evenings. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Matthew grew strong and healthy, walking early and talking in full sentences by age 2. He adored his father, following Yates around the property, mimicking his walk and gestures. But he was also gentle like his mother, careful with animals and kind to other children. In 1876, Lydia became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and while challenging, the pregnancy felt less frightening. In February of 1877, she gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, after Yates's mother. Clara was tiny like Lydia, with delicate features and wide gray-green eyes like her father. Yates was utterly smitten, this mountain of a man reduced to putty by his infant daughter. "She has you wrapped around her finger," Lydia teased one night, watching him rock Clara to sleep. "Same as her mother," Yates replied with a rare smile. The years passed in contentment. Matthew grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and learning, much to Lydia's delight. Clara proved to be fearless, climbing trees and chasing chickens, much to Yates's amused concern. In 1879, Sweetwater celebrated its 10th anniversary as an incorporated town. A festival was planned, and Lydia was asked to give a speech about education and the future of the community. She stood before the gathered townspeople, her children sitting with Yates in the front row, and reflected on her journey. "When I arrived in Sweetwater 7 years ago," she began, "many of you doubted I belonged here. I was too fragile, too weak, too unsuited for frontier life. And I will not lie, there were moments I doubted myself. But I learned that strength comes in many forms. It is not always about physical power. Sometimes it is about persistence, about courage, about refusing to let others define your limits." She looked at Yates, who watched her with undisguised pride and love. "I also learned that the right person sees you truly, sees past surface judgments to the person beneath. My husband saw strength in me when others saw only weakness. He gave me the courage to prove them wrong. And together, we built a life richer than I ever imagined possible. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, people lined up to shake her hand, to thank her for her years of service to their children. Yates waited until the crowd dispersed, then pulled her into his arms, careful not to crush her despite his strength. "I am proud of you," he murmured. "So damn proud." "We did this together," Lydia said. "Everything good in my life started when I met you." In 1881, Lydia made a difficult decision. After 9 years of teaching, she retired from the schoolhouse to focus on her family. Matthew was 7 and needed more attention with his advanced studies, and Clara, at 4, was a handful. Additionally, Lydia was pregnant again, a surprise that brought joy and some anxiety. Her retirement was marked by a ceremony where the town presented her with a plaque honoring her service. Former students, now young adults, spoke about how she had changed their lives. Several had gone on to higher education because of her encouragement. In October of 1881, Lydia gave birth to twin boys, Thomas and James. The delivery was the most difficult yet, and for a time, Yates feared he would lose her. But Lydia fought through and both babies were healthy. "4 children," Yates said, holding a twin in each massive arm. "We have our hands full now." "You complaining?" Lydia asked from the bed, exhausted but happy. "Never. I would have a dozen more if you wanted." "Let us see how we manage with these 4 first," Lydia laughed. The cabin had to be expanded again. Yates built additional bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a proper dining area. The property became a small ranch with cattle, horses, chickens, and a large garden that Lydia tended with the children's help. Matthew, serious and studious, helped his mother with the younger children's education. Clara, wild and fearless, helped her father with the animals. The twins, as they grew, proved to be inseparable, always together, always getting into mischief. In 1885, when Matthew was 11, he asked his mother about her past. "Why did you come to Texas?" he asked. "Grandmother's letters make it sound like you had a good life in Boston." Lydia set down her mending and considered her answer carefully. "I was sick a lot when I was young," she said. "Everyone treated me like I was made of glass, like I would break if I tried to do anything real. I felt suffocated by their fear for me. I wanted to prove I could be more, do more, so I took the biggest risk I could imagine and came here." "Were you scared? Terrified?" "And at first, everyone here thought the same as the people in Boston. They thought I was too weak for this life. But you proved them wrong. Your father helped me see I was stronger than I believed. He saved me in a lot of ways." Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "Father is the strongest person I know, but so are you, just differently." Lydia hugged her son, grateful for his understanding. That evening she told Yates about the conversation. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. The sounds of their children playing drifted from inside the house. "He is right, you know," Yates said. "You are the strongest person I know. What you have overcome, what you have built, it is remarkable." "We built it," Lydia corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." Yates pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. After 13 years of marriage, the gesture was familiar and comforting. "Remember when we first met?" he asked. "You were crying in the middle of nowhere, ready to give up. And you told me the townspeople were wrong about me. You saw me when no one else did." "I saw a woman with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine, even if she did not know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Their life was not always easy. Lydia still had days when her health flagged, when the old weakness crept back. But she had learned to work with her limitations rather than against them. She rested when needed, asked for help when necessary, and refused to let physical challenges define her worth. Yates, for his part, had learned to temper his protectiveness with trust. He no longer tried to shield Lydia from everything, understanding she needed to face challenges to feel alive. But he was always there, a steady presence, ready to catch her if she fell. In 1887, tragedy struck when a fire destroyed the general store. Mr. Patterson, who had once doubted Lydia, was ruined financially. The community rallied, but it was Lydia who organized a fundraiser, using her connections to former students and their families to raise money for rebuilding. "You did not have to do this," Mr. Patterson said, tears in his eyes as she presented him with the collected funds. "Not after how I treated you when you first arrived." "That was a long time ago," Lydia said gently. "We are a community. We help each other." The new general store was built by summer, and Mr. Patterson never forgot Lydia's kindness. The children continued to grow. Matthew, at 13, expressed interest in becoming a doctor. Lydia and Yates encouraged him, beginning to save money for medical school. Clara, at 10, shocked no one by declaring she wanted to train horses like her father. The twins, rambunctious and inseparable, were only 6 but already showed signs of their parents' best qualities. Thomas with Lydia's quick mind and James with Yates's steady strength. In 1890, Yates and Lydia celebrated their 17th anniversary. The children surprised them with a party, Matthew organizing his siblings with military precision. Friends and neighbors filled the cabin and spilled into the yard, celebrating the couple who had become pillars of the Sweetwater community. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Yates and Lydia found themselves alone on the porch once more, their favorite spot. 17 years, Lydia mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday I stepped off that stage, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Regrets? Yates asked. Not a single one. You? Only that I did not meet you sooner. He took her hand, still small and delicate in his large, calloused palm. You know what I love most about our story? What? Everyone said you were too fragile for this life. They were too blind to see your real strength. But I saw it, right from the start, and you proved every single one of them wrong. Lydia smiled, leaning against her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, the security of his presence. We proved them wrong together, she said. Everything we have, everything we built, it is because we believed in each other when no one else did. Best decision I ever made, believing in you. Second best, Lydia corrected. The best was asking me to marry you. Yates laughed, the sound deep and warm. You got me there. They sat watching the stars, comfortable in the silence that came from years of companionship. Inside, their children were settling down for the night, the sounds of their home wrapping around them like a blanket. Life in Sweetwater continued to evolve. The town grew, new families arrived, and progress marched steadily forward. In 1892, the railroad finally reached Sweetwater, connecting the town to larger markets and bringing new opportunities. Matthew left for medical school in 1894, at age 20. The goodbye was tearful, but Lydia and Yates were proud of their son's ambition. He promised to write weekly and return for visits when possible. Clara, at 17, was courting the son of a neighboring rancher, a young man who appreciated her spirit and skill with horses. Yates approved, though he made it clear the boy would have to prove himself worthy. The twins, now 13, were already as tall as their mother and showed signs of inheriting their father's impressive build. They worked the ranch alongside Yates, learning everything he could teach them about the land and animals. In 1895, Lydia's health took a concerning turn. A bad winter brought illness that settled in her lungs and would not clear. The doctor prescribed rest and warm weather, but worry creased Yates's forehead with deep lines. "I am not giving up," Lydia told him firmly. "I have survived worse. I know, but let me worry about you. It is what I do best." True to her word, Lydia fought through the illness. By spring, she had recovered, though she remained more careful about exposure to cold and damp. Yates built a greenhouse attached to the cabin, a place where Lydia could garden even in poor weather, somewhere warm and bright that lifted her spirits. In 1896, Matthew graduated from medical school and returned to Sweetwater to open a practice. The town rejoiced at having a trained doctor, and Lydia and Yates burst with pride at their son's accomplishment. "You inspired this," Matthew told his mother at his welcome home celebration. "Watching you teach, seeing you help people, it made me want to do the same." Clara married her rancher in 1897, a joyful ceremony that brought together both families. Yates walked his daughter down the aisle, this tiny, fearless girl who had grown into a remarkable woman. When he placed her hand in her husband's, he whispered something that made Clara laugh through her tears. Later, Lydia asked what he had said. "I told him she is tougher than she looks, and if he ever forgets that, she will probably rope and brand him like a stray calf." Lydia laughed. "That sounds like our Clara." The twins took over more of the ranch operations as Yates slowed down. He was in his early 50s now, his hair more gray than brown, his movements a bit slower. But he was still strong, still protective, still the man who had seen past Lydia's fragile appearance to the strength beneath. In 1899, Clara gave birth to Lydia and Yates's first grandchild, a daughter named Lydia Rose. Holding her namesake, Lydia felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. "She is perfect," Lydia whispered, rocking the infant gently. "Like her grandmother," Yates said, watching with soft eyes. That year also brought news that made Lydia's heart swell with pride. The school board wanted to rename the schoolhouse in her honor, calling it the Everhart School in recognition of her years of service and the foundation she had laid for education in Sweetwater. At the dedication ceremony, Lydia stood with her family, overwhelmed by the honor. "When I came to Sweetwater 27 years ago," she said to the assembled crowd, "I was running from pity and toward purpose. I found both purpose and love here. This town gave me a chance when I desperately needed one. It let me prove that strength comes in many forms, that fragility and fortitude can coexist. I am honored beyond words by this recognition, but the true honor has been serving this community and watching your children grow into remarkable adults." The applause was deafening. Yates stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back, steady and proud. As the new century dawned in 1900, Lydia and Yates reflected on their incredible journey. They sat on their porch, a ritual that had sustained them through decades, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky. 27 years since we met," Lydia said softly. "Can you believe it?" "Best 27 years of my life," Yates replied. "Though I am betting the next 27 will be even better," Lydia laughed. "Ever the optimist, ever the realist. Look at what we have built, Lydia. 4 incredible children, grandchildren now, a home, a life. We did that together." "We did," Lydia agreed. "And you know what I think about sometimes? If I had listened to everyone back in Boston, if I had stayed where it was safe and comfortable, I would have missed all of this. I would have missed you." Yates pulled her close, his strength still solid despite the years. "But you did not stay. You took the risk. You came to Texas, faced down everyone who doubted you, and built a life on your own terms. That is who you are, Lydia Kincaid. That is who you have always been." Matthew had established a thriving practice, becoming the doctor his mother had needed when she first arrived in Sweetwater. Clara and her husband ran a successful horse ranch, their daughter toddling happily between her parents. The twins, now young men of 19, were courting sisters from a neighboring town, much to Yates's amusement. History repeating itself, he told Lydia, brothers finding their matches together. Life continued its beautiful rhythm. In 1902, Clara had a son, naming him Yates after his grandfather. The big mountain man, now in his mid-50s, held his grandson and cried openly, not caring who saw. "I never thought I would have this," he told Lydia that night. "After I lost my first family, I thought I was done. But you gave me everything. A second chance, a full life, love beyond measure." "We gave each other everything," Lydia corrected. "I was drowning in other people's low expectations, and you threw me a lifeline. You saw me, truly saw me, when everyone else just saw weakness." In 1903, Thomas married one of the sisters he had been courting, and James married the other in a double ceremony that became the talk of Sweetwater. The twins built homes on the ranch property, staying close to their parents and continuing the family business. Lydia's health remained fragile but managed. She had learned to pace herself, to recognize when she needed rest, to accept help without feeling diminished. Yates remained attentive but no longer hovered anxiously. They had found a balance that worked. In 1905, Matthew married a nurse he had met during his training. The wedding was held at the cabin, the property now sprawling and prosperous. As Lydia watched her eldest son pledge his life to his bride, she felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. More grandchildren arrived over the following years. Clara had another daughter in 1906. Thomas welcomed a son in 1907, and James had twin daughters in 1908, continuing the family tradition. Matthew and his wife had a son in 1909. The cabin had become the heart of a large, extended family. Sunday dinners brought everyone together, children running wild in the yard while adults talked and laughed. Yates, now gray-haired but still strong, would sit with his grandchildren and tell them stories of the old days, of trapping in the mountains and meeting their grandmother. Was grandmother really that small? One grandchild asked skeptically, looking at the formidable woman who ran the household with gentle efficiency. "Smaller," Yates said. "So small I could lift her with one hand, but she had the biggest heart and the strongest will of anyone I ever met." "Still does." Lydia would blush at such praise, but she never denied it. She had learned to accept her strengths along with her weaknesses. In 1910, Sweetwater celebrated 38 years since Lydia's arrival. The town was unrecognizable from the dusty frontier settlement she had first seen. It had paved streets, electric lights, a telephone exchange, and a growing population. But through all the changes, some things remained constant. The Everhart school still educated children. The church still stood at the center of town. And Lydia and Yates Kincaid remained the embodiment of what the frontier had been about. Not just surviving but thriving, not just enduring but loving deeply. On their 37th anniversary in 1910, their children organized a massive celebration. Family and friends gathered from across Texas to honor the couple who had become legends in their own right. Speeches were made, toasts raised, and stories shared. But the most moving moment came when Matthew stood to speak about his parents. "My father," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "is the strongest man I know. Not just physically, though he can still outwork men half his age, but strong in character, in loyalty, in love. He saw something in my mother that others missed. He saw strength where they saw weakness, courage where they saw fragility." He turned to Lydia. "And my mother proved him right. She came to a place that did not want her, that doubted her, that expected her to fail. And she not only succeeded, she transformed this town." She educated generations, saved a child's life, built a family, and showed everyone that strength comes in forms they were too blind to see. There was not a dry eye in the gathering. Yates held Lydia's hand, their fingers intertwined, 37 years of love and partnership evident in that simple gesture. As the party wound down and family departed, Yates and Lydia found themselves once more on their porch. It had been rebuilt several times over the decades, expanded and improved, but it remained their sanctuary. 37 years, Yates mused. And I still remember that first day like it was yesterday. You were crying in the scrubland, ready to give up, and I took one look at you and knew. Knew what? That you were mine, that we were meant to find each other. I had been dead inside for years, and then there you were, bringing me back to life. Lydia leaned against him, fitting perfectly under his arm as she always had. I thought I was coming to Sweetwater to teach children, she said. But I was really coming to find you, to build this life, to become who I was always meant to be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard drifted to them, sweet and innocent. Inside, their adult children cleaned up from the party, their voices a comforting murmur. "You think they understand?" Lydia asked. "Our children, our grandchildren, do they understand how hard it was at first? Maybe not fully. But they understand what matters, that love matters, that believing in someone matters, that strength comes in many forms." Lydia nodded. "I want them to know they can overcome anything. That other people's doubts do not have to define them, that taking risks, being brave, it is worth it. They know," Yates assured her. "You and I, we have shown them every day of their lives. We took two broken people and built something beautiful. That is the legacy we leave them." The years continued to pass gently. In 1912, Lydia turned 60, a milestone she had never expected to reach. Her childhood doctors had predicted she would not survive to adulthood, yet here she was, surrounded by a family that numbered over 20 people, all descended from her and Yates. The celebration was quiet, just family, exactly as Lydia wanted. Her children and grandchildren showered her with love and small gifts, but the most precious gift came from Yates. He led her outside at sunset, to the spot where they had first shared a meal all those years ago. He had rebuilt the exact setting, complete with a flat rock to sit on. "I wanted to remind you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "of where it all started. When I first saw you, I saw a woman who needed to remember her own strength. And you did. You remembered, and you became more than anyone imagined. I am so proud of you, Lydia. So grateful you took a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know how to talk pretty but knew how to see true." Lydia cried, happy tears that Yates wiped away with callous thumbs. "You gave me everything," she whispered. "A home, a family, a purpose, but most of all you gave me the courage to be myself. I love you, Yates Kincaid. I have loved you from that first day, and I will love you forever." They kissed as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would echo through generations. In 1915, Yates began to slow down significantly. He was in his late 60s now, his body showing the wear of a lifetime of hard labor. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Lydia never wavered. He still walked her to town when she wanted to visit the school, still held her hand during church services, still pulled her close every night. Matthew, now a respected doctor, monitored his father's health carefully. "He is strong," he told Lydia. "Stronger than most men his age, but he needs to take it easier." Yates, of course, refused to slow down too much. The ranch was his life's work, and he remained involved in every decision. But he did delegate more to Thomas and James, trusting his sons to carry on what he had built. In 1918, The world was gripped by war and influenza, but Sweetwater, isolated and careful, largely escaped the worst of both. The community pulled together, and Lydia organized relief efforts for soldiers and their families, her organizational skills as sharp as ever. When Matthew's wife fell ill with the flu, Lydia nursed her back to health despite the risk to her own fragile constitution. Yates tried to stop her, fearful of losing her, but Lydia was adamant. "She is family," Lydia said firmly. "I will not abandon her because I am afraid. You taught me to be brave, remember." Yates could only shake his head and help her, marveling at the woman who had seemed so breakable 46 years ago, but had proven to be unbreakable in all the ways that mattered. In 1920, Lydia and Yates celebrated their 47th anniversary. They were older now, slower, but their love had only deepened with time. They sat on their porch, a tradition that had lasted nearly 5 decades, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren. Clara's daughter Lydia Rose, now 21, sat at her grandmother's feet. "Grandmother, tell me again how you and grandfather met," she requested, as she had countless times before. Lydia smiled, her face lined with age but still beautiful to Yates. "I was lost," she began, both literally and figuratively. "I had come to Sweetwater to teach, but everyone said I was too fragile, too weak for frontier life. They were ready to send me away. I walked out into the scrubland, crying and defeated, and then your grandfather appeared like something from a dream." "What did he say?" Lydia Rose prompted, knowing the story but never tiring of it. "He asked if I was lost, and I said no, but I was lying. I was completely lost, but then he told me something that changed everything. He said the people in town were wrong about me, that they only saw the surface. He saw strength they were too blind to see." Yates picked up the story. "She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, small and delicate and crying. But when she lifted her chin and looked me in the eye, I saw fire there. I saw a fighter. I knew right then she was special." "And you fell in love?" Lydia Rose asked, even though she knew the answer. "Not right then," Lydia said, "but soon after. Your grandfather believed in me when I barely believed in myself. He gave me the strength to prove everyone wrong. And somewhere along the way, I realized I loved him more than I thought possible to love another person." "Still do," Yates added, squeezing Lydia's hand. The family gathering continued late into the evening, filled with laughter and love. As the last guests departed and Lydia and Yates prepared for bed, they moved slowly but contentedly through their nightly routine, worn smooth by decades of practice. "You ever wish for anything different?" Lydia asked as they settled into bed, Yates's arms around her as they had been for 47 years. "Not a single thing," Yates replied. "Every moment with you has been a gift. Even the hard times, the scary times, they were worth it because we faced them together." "We built something remarkable, did we not?" Lydia said softly. "From that first meeting in the scrubland to this, a family, a legacy, a love that has lasted. We did. And it all started because I saw what others did not. I saw you, truly saw you, and knew you were meant for great things." Lydia turned in his arms, looking at the face she had loved for so long, now lined with age but still her Yates, still her mountain man, still her heart. "And you were right," she said. "About all of it. I was stronger than they thought, but only because you showed me how to access that strength." They fell asleep wrapped in each other, two souls who had found their perfect match in the most unlikely of circumstances. The following years were gentle, filled with the quiet joys of a life well lived. Grandchildren graduated, married, started their own families. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas and James's management. Matthew's medical practice served the community faithfully. Clara's horse ranch became known throughout Texas for the quality of its animals. And through it all, Lydia and Yates remained the center, the foundation upon which everything was built. Their love story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. In the spring of 1925, as Sweetwater prepared to celebrate its incorporation anniversary, the town council approached Lydia with a request. They wanted her to write the official history of Sweetwater, to document its growth from frontier settlement to thriving town. At 73, Lydia took on the project with enthusiasm. She spent months researching, interviewing longtime residents, compiling stories and facts. Yates helped however he could, his memories of the early days proving invaluable. The history was published in the fall of 1925, a comprehensive record that preserved Sweetwater's past for future generations. At the book's launch, Lydia dedicated it to the town that had given her a chance and to the man who had given her everything. "Sweetwater taught me that home is not where you start," she said to the gathered crowd. "It is where you are accepted, where you can grow, where you can become your truest self. And this town, after some initial hesitation, gave me that gift. But mostly, I dedicate this to my husband Yates, who saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, who believed in me when no one else did, who loved me through every challenge and triumph. He is my home, my heart, my life." There was not a dry eye in the audience. Yates, now 78 and moving slowly but still strong in spirit, stood and made his way to his wife. He pulled her into his arms, uncaring of the public display, and kissed her forehead. "You were never invisible to me," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "From that first moment, you were all I could see." As 1926 began, Lydia and Yates were slowing down significantly. They spent most days at the cabin, surrounded by family who visited constantly. Their children had agreed to rotate care, ensuring their parents were never alone and always comfortable. On a warm afternoon in March, the entire family gathered for Sunday dinner, a tradition that had sustained them for decades. 4 generations sat around tables that Yates had built with his own hands, eating food prepared from Lydia's recipes. After the meal, as the sun began its descent, Lydia and Yates made their way to the porch. Their children tried to help, but Yates waved them off good-naturedly. "I can still walk my wife to the porch," he grumbled with a smile. They settled into their chairs, the same chairs they had sat in for over 50 years, worn smooth by use and time. Their family spread out across the yard, children playing, adults talking, the sounds of life and love filling the air. "This is perfect," Lydia said softly, her hand finding Yates's as naturally as breathing. "This moment right here, it is everything I ever wanted." "Because of you," Yates replied. "All of this exists because you had the courage to come to Texas, to stay when everyone said you should go, to build a life here. You created all of this, Lydia." "We created it," she corrected, as she had done countless times over the decades. "Together. Always together." They sat in silence, watching their legacy play out before them. Matthew was explaining something medical to one of his nephews, using the same patient tone Lydia had once used teaching. Clara was showing a grandchild how to braid a horse's mane, passing down skills Yates had taught her. The twins were arguing good-naturedly about ranch management, their wives laughing at the familiar debate. "You remember," Lydia said suddenly, "that first night you walked me back to town. You told me that people were comfortable and did not like being uncomfortable, and that I made them uncomfortable because I did not fit their idea of how things should be. I remember, and I told you that did not mean you were wrong. It meant they were wrong for being so rigid. You were right. You were right about everything. About me, about this place, about what we could build together. Yates brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Best thing I ever did was walk up to a crying woman in the scrubland and tell her she was stronger than she knew. Best thing I ever did was believe you, Lydia replied. As the evening deepened and stars began to appear, one by one their family members said their goodbyes, heading to their own homes scattered across the property and town. Promises to return soon, hugs and kisses exchanged, laughter and love flowing freely. Finally alone, Lydia and Yates remained on the porch, unwilling to leave the perfect peace of the moment. 53 years since I came to Sweetwater, Lydia mused. A lifetime. My lifetime. And every good thing in it came from meeting you. I was dead inside until I met you, Yates said. You brought me back to life, gave me a reason to come down from the mountains to be part of the world again. You saved me, Lydia, just as surely as I like to think I helped save you. We saved each other, Lydia said. That is what love does. It sees past the surface to the truth beneath. It gives strength when we are weak and hope when we are lost. You did that for me, Yates. You saw strength when everyone else saw fragility. You saw possibility when they saw limitations. You saw me. The night grew deeper, the stars brighter. Inside the cabin, lamplight glowed warmly. This house that Yates had built with his own hands, filled with memories of a life well lived, a love well tended. No regrets, Yates asked, as he had so many times over the years. Not one, Lydia replied, as she always did. Not a single one. This life, this love, our family, all of it has been more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me that, Yates. You and this wild, beautiful, challenging frontier. Together, you made me whole. They sat together, hands clasped, hearts united as they had been for over half a century. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love that had weathered every storm, who had created a legacy that would echo through generations. The frontier that had once seemed so hostile had become home. The town that had doubted her had become family. And the mountain man who had seen past her fragile exterior to the strength within had become her everything. Lydia leaned her head against Yates's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the security that had sustained her through decades. I love you, she whispered, for seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me this beautiful life. I love you, Yates replied, his voice deep and certain. For being brave enough to stay, for proving everyone wrong, for loving me back. They sat beneath the stars, surrounded by the life they had built, the love they had nurtured, the legacy they had created. From that first meeting in the scrubland to this perfect moment, their story had been one of seeing past surfaces, of recognizing strength in unexpected forms, of love conquering doubt. They said she was too fragile for frontier life. But the mountain man saw strength they were too blind to see. And together, they had proven that sometimes the most unlikely people create the most extraordinary love stories.